No.
You said Jay told me he was going to be recording tonight. That's why I set up back here.
I was gonna do that. I just want to verify that it's.
Yeah, okay. Well, while he's doing that, we're in Genesis chapter 48. This week, I don't think if we did finish, we finished hurriedly, and I want to look at it a little bit before we get into the monster that is Genesis 49. Thelma is here. It's good to know. Robin is here as well. Hello, Robin. So, 2 people are logged into the PD's account. Hope he doesn't mind.
This is the only time Mom uses Facebook.
I don't blame her. I don't like it either. But here we are. Okay. Genesis 48. Let's go ahead and reread if we didn't get to it last time. We'll reread verses 8 through 20. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here." So he said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were so dim from age that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your children as well." Then Joseph took them from his knees and bowed with his face to the ground. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. He blessed Joseph and said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. May my name live on in them, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac. May they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." When Joseph saw that his father had laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him, and he grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head and to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But the father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He will also become a people, and he will also be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." He blessed them and that day, saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessing, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Okay. Any thoughts on that reading? I don't think we covered that last week now that we read it. Maybe we mentioned it briefly. Hi, Nell. Good to see you. Hope you and Dale are doing okay.
He was insistent on what he hadn't made a mistake in his eyes, like he had thought that he had.
It is a little bit reminiscent of Jacob stealing of the blessing from Esau when they went into Isaac, and there's Isaac can't see very well, so there's this subterfuge, the fur. I guess Esau was a hairy man, a lot of fur on his arms and his clothes to try to smell like. I guess Esau was also a gaming man, so it was this intent to deceive. And in this scene, there is no intent to deceive, but there is an intent to correct. And it's interesting that Joseph would want to correct when Joseph is blessed out of turn, out of the line of genealogy, out of the line of being the number of being born, because Joseph is way down the list, and yet he is being effectively here double blessed. He is receiving two portions of Jacob's inheritance, one for his son Ephraim and one for his son Manasseh. And this is a good introduction to chapter 49, because when we look at these blessings, especially in chapter 49, where it is a poem really, but it's also a father's blessing. It is prophetic. And then at the same time, it is, as Israel goes back and looks at this, as they remember what their nation was at one point, it is explanatory of some of the things that occur to their nation. So, and this is a precursor to that, because you have these two tribes that are being created, Ephraim and Manasseh, and they're not, in a sense, wholly their own, but they are in a way, because they are the sons of Joseph, but they have been elevated. And they will each receive their own land, their own inheritance in the promised land when Israel retakes it. And Manasseh, if you look on a map, and there's lots of maps of the inheritance of Israel in the Canaan land, Israel's occupation of the Canaan land, Manasseh looks huge. It's on both sides of the Jordan River, and it's and both of these tribes are very prominent early on once Israel conquers the land. Ephraim, though, is more central, and Ephraim included Jerusalem, although Jerusalem doesn't become really settled in a Jewish city until David takes it. So after the period of the judges, after Saul and after, even some of David, it takes a while before they actually get Jerusalem from the Jebusites. But there is this preeminence of Ephraim to begin with. Ephraim's right in the middle of the country, and Ephraim becomes really the first among equals, I guess you could say. They are the number one tribe early in Israel's history. They are the most dominant tribe early on. And that changes with the monarchy for sure. It takes a little while for that to fully happen, but that's a changing factor in all of this. But it is, the God is through Jacob doing what God tends to do, which is to defy expectations. We have these cultural expectations. The firstborn takes the lion's share of the inheritance. The firstborn gets treated better than everybody else. And in this case, it's not based on morality. It's not that Manasseh did something wrong or anything like that. It's just, this is Jacob, presumably through God's initiative, conferring favor upon the younger over the older. So that is the cause of the controversy, and it's interesting that Joseph is reluctant to accept it. But that's that section. Anybody else have any thoughts on it before we move on?
I just, in this footnote, it reminds us that Jacob was the younger, and he got the birthright. He preferred the younger sister, Rachel, above the older Leah. And now Joseph's younger son ahead of the older.
Joseph leapfrogs 8 brothers or whatever, and I guess 10 brothers. So he leapfrogs 10 brothers, and that's the story. It's just, Genesis is a collection largely of brother stories, and almost always the older brother is rejected. And that's it's yet the persistence and the favor for the firstborn continues. And even under the law, the firstborn is redeemed a certain way, and it's there are privileges and status that goes along with being the firstborn. So these are our cultural preferences a lot of times. I think it still holds up a little bit. I mean, that's maybe also responsibility. Maybe we put that along with the eldest child. Responsibility goes with the privilege, but that the firstborn is kind of, if you have multiple children, the one you name after the father, if you name a junior and you have a bunch of boys, it's going to be the oldest boy, isn't it? Almost all the time. So the name you have in mind, maybe that's most important for you to pass on to a child, to one of your children, you give to the first one you can, as a rule. But God is not bound by that. So let's finish up chapter 48 and get into this bear 49. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. I give you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow." Okay, now this is an interesting way to wrap this chapter up, although I don't think they meant to wrap a chapter up, but it's an interesting statement because all of a sudden Jacob is asserting himself as this great warrior, and that's not really the image of Jacob that we take throughout his life, is it? Now, he's a fighter. He wrestles with God, the angel, whatever. He contends with God. That's how he becomes Israel. And he doesn't quit, and he's a schemer, but going out to battle is not really something we identify with Jacob. In fact, early on in this chapter, he kind of talks about his own suffering and how God took care of him. And all of the good things that happened were because God led him, rather than because he went out and was a great warrior and a great champion. But all of a sudden now, so it kind of looks, we like to think that these books were all written by Moses, start to finish, straight through. But the text really resists that thought. Especially in Hebrew. And it shows through in English at times where it looks like they were, Moses had a big part in it, was patching in other works, maybe putting down in writing what were oral traditions, and that they got revisited at times. You okay, Connie? What? Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, you had your hand on your heart there. Yeah. Maybe you're saying Pledge of Allegiance for us. Okay. But sorry to distract it, but it's likely and almost assuredly that while they are in captivity, while the Hebrews or the Jewish people are in Babylonian captivity, that the priests went back and looked at these materials and treated them in a way designed to inspire repentance and return to God, a keeping of the law, and a purification of the people so that when they came back into their land, they could rebuild and maintain their presence there, allow God to maintain their presence there with them. And if this was not originally in this text, it's so ancient now that I think we certainly need to kind of be very respectful of it. But Jacob is looking at death, and he's looking at it with, in a sense, really calm assurance. And we'll talk a bit about more of that in chapter 49. So let's move into 49, and I'm just going to go ahead and read verses 1. This is a long read, but 1 through 28, and we'll go back and look at the tribes, and we'll see what y'all think about them. Jacob summoned his sons and said, "Assemble yourselves that I may tell you what will befall you in the days to come. Gather together and hear, O sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power, uncontrolled as water. You shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Let not my glory be united with their assembly. Because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down to you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who dares rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. He ties his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are dull from wine, and his teeth white from milk. Zebulun will dwell at the seashore, and he shall be a haven for ships, and his flank shall be towards Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between the sheepfolds. When he saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant, he bowed his shoulder to bear burdens, and became a slave at forced labor. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a horned snake in the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that his rider falls backwards. For your salvation I wait, O Lord. As for Gad, raiders shall raid him, but he will raid at their heels. As for Asher, his food shall be rich, and he will yield royal dainties. Naphtali is a doe let loose. He gives beautiful words. Joseph is a fruitful bow by a spring, its branches run over a wall. The archers bitterly attacked him and shot at him and harassed him, but his bow remained firm, and his arms were agile. From the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, for there is a shepherd, the stone of Israel. From the God of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father have surpassed the blessings of my ancestors. Up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills, may they be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of the one distinguished among his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoils. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them. He blessed them, every one, with the blessing appropriate to him. Okay. What do we think about that?
Wasn't it Levi that was his ancestors were priests?
Yes, Levi is the tribe of priests.
Well, here it says he was weapons of violence and their swords. And they, with their anger, they killed men, and with their boldness, they hamstrung oxen. And cursed them with their anger, so it doesn't say anything about him being the head of the priestly tribe. Is that because it's too soon for them to be given that?
Well, they're not called, the priesthood hasn't been established yet because we don't have the law of Moses. And the priests are called Levitical priests, and the priests are sometimes called Aaronic priests, Aaron, referring to Aaron being the first high priest. The blessings, especially for the first 3 or 4, I guess really the first 3, not so much Judah, but for Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, reflect their father's displeasure with some of their actions in their past. Levi and Simeon raided and sacked and murdered a bunch of people in Shechem because their full sister Dinah, had been raped by the prince. And again, that's a very difficult story because it looks like Jacob wanted them to kind of live and let live. And so Simeon and Levi exact what they believe to be justice. I think Jacob's analysis of it seems to be that it was far too excessive. And we talked about this at the time. It's a very difficult story because under Mosaic law, they could have been killed. This guy could have been killed anyway but also under Mosaic law, he could have been forced to marry Dinah. And in the story, he wants to marry Dinah. They don't want him to marry Dinah. And there's no real easy resolution of all the things that are going on in that story. From their trying to put on their eyes and see from their perspective, when Dinah is raped, what happens is Jacob takes a big financial hit because now he can't marry her off and get the bride price. Because when you pay the bride price, you're entitled to a virgin. And he can't do that now. So Jacob feels like he is the one who has been wronged, and it is up to him what will happen as a result of that. And her brothers took it upon themselves. And now that's going to create hardship in their relationships with all the other surrounding peoples that they went in, and to see them, they have all the men of the town be circumcised. Okay, you're going to marry into our family, you have to be circumcised. So that all the men get circumcised. And while they're recovering from that, they attack. So they're weakened by that procedure. And so it's a very difficult story all the way around. I mean, it sounds like they got what was coming to them, but at the same time, that's not Jacob's take on it. And so it kind of, is Jacob wrong? Again, this is somewhat looking at it from our lens, which is inevitable to some extent, but also they didn't just take an eye for an eye. They didn't just punish the person who was affected by it. They took a whole bunch of eyes. If you call it an eye for an eye, they took a whole bunch of eyes. So it was a revenge movement that Jacob feared would cause reprisals and made his position, at least he perceived his position, more difficult. He didn't approve of it, and so that is voiced in this blessing, which is actually a cursing, if you will, much more of a cursing. In a way, Simeon, both tribes basically, Jacob is saying here, you will not have an inheritance. Well, Simeon does get an inheritance. Levi gets a different type of inheritance. Simeon's inheritance is land totally surrounded by Judah. And Simeon slowly kind of disappears into Judah. Judah just kind of subsumes Simeon. But they're still kind of around. And in the handout, I mentioned that even under King Josiah, some cities of Simeon are mentioned. So it is still kind of understood as an entity to some extent. And Josiah is very late. So, but they're kind of lost. And then some other tribes take some of Simeon too, but they're just kind of lost into Judah. They kind of lose their own distinctive identity. And Levi is also dispersed through Israel because they are the priests. Because they go to the priestly towns and they have their homes and their land, but they don't have a big chunk of land set aside for them. Because they have to serve everybody. They're the priests. And the Levites, they're all over the place. So they're kind of dispersed. But in a way, that's not really a cursing. In a way, that's kind of a blessing. And these are certainly kind of playing on the names of the people. Levi has something to do with being joined or united. And he's saying you're going to be scattered. I don't want to be joined with you. Reuben, let's see, is God has seen Leah's plight. He looks down on Leah as being this unloved wife. He sees her. And as a result of seeing her, he gives her Reuben. And Reuben has a big part to play, really, even as a child. When he gives his mother the mandrakes he finds, he goes out and digs up some mandrakes and plants. He gives them to his mother. She uses those, evidently are so desirable, she's able to use those, give them to Rachel in exchange for sexual access to Jacob. 2 more tribes of Israel are born following Reuben giving the mandrakes to his mother. Reuben's flag, Reuben's banner, they all had banners. Reuben's banner had mandrakes on it. But then Reuben, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, defiles Jacob's bed. It puts it in context of adultery, that he goes in and has sex with Bilhah, the concubine, the slave to Rachel, who also was a mother of tribes. It is possible that what happened, and I know that our text doesn't render it this way, and the Hebrews would have probably not made much of a distinction between these two. That when Rachel died, Rachel was Jacob's favorite wife. So that's who he slept with every night. On a regular basis, his bed was in with Rachel's tent. That's who he wanted to be with. When Rachel died, instead of moving his bed in with Leah, his other wife, he moved his bed in with Bilhah, his concubine, who had been the slave to Rachel. And that what Reuben did was go in there, grab his father's bed, and move it into his mother's tent, Leah, and really toss the place upside down. Now, that doesn't sound nearly as bad to us, but it is certainly a defilement of the father's bed, and it is messing around with who dad's sleeping with, basically. He's inserting himself into his father's nakedness, if you will, his father's sexuality. And that's a rabbinic tradition and interpretation of what happened, not the way English translates Hebrew into it. So I think we get to the same place basically with either one, which is that Reuben was involved with his father's concubine in a way he shouldn't have been involved, one way or the other. It wasn't his place to do that. And Jacob hasn't forgotten it. Years later, Jacob hasn't forgotten it. And it is a cause and a sort of, and Reuben does some other good things. Reuben intercedes on behalf of Joseph, keeps him from being killed. He's attempting to get Joseph and return him back to his father when he finds out that Judah had him sold. He also is the first one to offer up security. Say, you can kill my sons if I can't bring Benjamin back. Because we got to go back to Egypt. We got to take Benjamin. Because that's what the guy said. We're not going to get anything if we don't take Benjamin. So he offers up his sons as security for Benjamin. And Jacob says no. He still says no. It's Judah that's able to convince Jacob to send Benjamin with him to go get food. And Judah has his own issues. But those issues don't seem to be a real problem. Maybe he doesn't know the story, never learns the story that Judah was the one who sold him to the Ishmaelites. Maybe they look at how all this worked out and they're saying God was behind it. So what Judah did was okay. Yes. God redeemed the sinful acts of the brother along the way to make Joseph's dreams come true. Yes, he did, either Robin or Thelma, he did lay it out harshly. And Jacob's anger has not abated over the years. He's been stewing on this, and it's cooked down, and it's very intense. And it costs Reuben, being the firstborn, you are preeminent. You have all the indications of being great, but you won't be great. It's going to be taken away from you. Let's see. He is his descendants are involved in the insurrection against Moses. We see in number 16. And then also they are not willing to fight, maybe through just indecision. They can't decide whether or not they want to do it. In Judges 5:15 through 16, in the Song of Deborah and the Song of Barak, they had to face these Gentile oppressors. Their military guy was Sisera. And Sisera is the guy that got the splitting headache. Remember that story? The lady put the tent spike through his head into the ground. Judges are rowdy, man. They are rowdy. I love the book of Judges. It would make a good Quentin Tarantino film. He could just change the timeline and it'd be great. But they were rowdy. But Reuben fails. His countrymen, his brothers at that point, the tribe fails and are called out by it. So that's their kind of two big historic moments, are both rebellion against Moses and a failure to act to defend the people. So Reuben, who's the firstborn, who should be the preeminent, is not preeminent. It gets yanked away from him. And here Jacob is saying, it's because you defiled my couch, because you came up into my bed. And we can take with what our text says to us, or we can look at the rabbinic tradition, either one, and I think we get to the same place, which is, don't mess with your parents and their nocturnal activities. That's their business. You're here because of them. Just be glad of it, and leave it alone. And that's the word to Reuben. I will say he makes a fine sandwich. But that's have you ever had a Reuben? Has everybody here had a Reuben? Oh, man, that's good stuff. It's not kosher, though. It's not kosher. Put Swiss cheese on brisket is not kosher. And again, Simeon and Levi are cursed because of their actions against Shechem. One is dispersed in a manner that is dishonorable, which is Simeon, and one is dispersed really, though, in a blessing, in a way that is honorable, Levi, through serving his brothers. Simeon's name indicates that God heard Leah. So Reuben's name indicates that God saw Leah. Simeon's name indicates that God heard Leah. Levi's name indicates that Leah hopes now her and her husband will be fully joined. She doesn't like being wife number two. There's no 1A and 1B. There's really, in Jacob's heart, there's one, and there's three other women that kind of hang around. To him, Rachel is his wife. But he ends up being buried with Leah. So we'll talk about that probably next week. But so Simeon's name, or Reuben's name is God sees. Simeon's name is God hears. Levi's name expresses a desire for her to be reconciled, to be fully engaged with and attached to her husband. And then Judah comes along. And the preeminence that should have gone to Reuben, that was his by right of birth, will go to Judah, despite his own failings. The story with Tamar and Judah, it's as hard as any of these other stories. There's no real easy solution to any of that. It just, I guess, hopefully what we take from it is we are so glad we don't live in those eras. And we're so glad that women today have a little more control over what happens to them, because for most of the time, it seems like women are wise enough to know what's good for them and what's not good for them. Now, not all women, but the women that have been in my life, most of all, were all a lot wiser than I am. So every time I disagree with Sherry, I end up regretting it in one way or another. But she's almost always right, and my mom was almost always right. And they just would not have had any of their own agency back then. It wouldn't have mattered what they thought. It wouldn't have mattered what they wouldn't have really expected it, probably, because they never would have seen it. So, but Judah's name is important because it is simply a praise to God. In Judah, Leah doesn't look at her son and say, how does this impact my relationship with my husband? God has seen my plight. He'll make my husband love me. God has heard my plight, heard my cries. He will make my husband love me. Levi, my husband and I will be joined now. She's given up on that with Judah. All she does is praise God. She's finally kind of accepted her situation in the world, which is the less favored wife. But God has comforted her during all of this. And she sees that what I don't have from my husband, I have from God. God loves me. Look at all these sons he keeps giving me. Some people would think she'd be more blessed with daughters, and that's understandable. But she wanted sons. Back in that culture, it's the mothers wanted boys. Connie's not buying that, but but in this culture, the sons were more valuable to their mothers than a daughter would have been. So when we come to Judah, it's a name of reflecting praise, and everything about Judah's prophecy and blessing is royal and regal. I mean, it's big time. I mean, he's going to be huge, and that's the way it plays out. Just in Israel's history, Judah becomes the dominant tribe. It is Judah, even after the kingdom's divided, is Judah and the 10 northern tribes, right? 1 against 10, and that's fine with Judah. That's the thing. They are so dominant. They are so powerful. They are the tribe of kings. They have the political power. You got David. You got Solomon. Solomon is, David is their aspirational figure of a king. It is under Solomon, though, that Israel really reaches its zenith, where it's the greatest nation that it ever was under Solomon. And then, of course, it starts to fall very quickly. But, they have the power, and with the power comes the wealth, comes the dominance. They are the strong. They are the lion, and that's their mascot. The banner of Judah would have been a lion. And that's about the best banner you can have, isn't it? I mean, we're the big bad lions. We're not the wildcats or even the cougars or, the huskies we're the lions, roaring lion. And as much as that applied to Judah, we can also see in this prophecies and symbolism applicable to Jesus, prophetically looking ahead to this great and true son of David, Jesus, who is, we don't really talk about him this much, but the Lion of Judah. He is a roaring lion. He is a king. And the fact that the greatness and the majesty and the regal nature of him is lost to the eyes of the world doesn't diminish it at all. It's still there. Just because we don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And David is this great king, and his son is even greater. Not just Solomon, but Jesus, the son of David. So all of this has got messianic overtones as well. You just see it, his donkey's colt to the choice vine. I mean, you think about Jesus, his triumphal entry on the foal of a donkey. This is, it's certainly understandable that Christians see this as speaking to Jesus and being fully and finally fulfilled, because, the prophecy here is that it will never stop. He'll never not be king. The house of Judah will never not be king. Well, how does Judah have an eternal kingdom? It has it through Jesus. It didn't have it through David and his descendants until Jesus came along. mean, they reigned a long time, but ultimately it stopped. But it came back, was brought back by God in Jesus Christ. Again, they kind of overlooked some of the failings of Judah. They overlooked the scheming to sell Joseph. It was his idea to sell Joseph. They overlooked the mistreatment of Tamar, but at the same time, Tamar ultimately is vindicated because she is impregnated by Judah, and so her children, her twin boys, are both children of Judah. They get bumped up a notch. They go from being Judah's grandsons to being Judah's sons because of his failings. God uses Judah's weakness to elevate those boys, and they become greater heirs than they would have been otherwise. Okay. Well, I knew we weren't going to get through all of these. We got through the first four, and they're kind of the big ones. Joseph is really big too, and so is Benjamin. But we'll try to finish up chapter 49 next week. I will be gone the week after that, and then hopefully we'll finish up chapter 4. We might get into chapter 50 some next week, but I doubt it. But we'll finish up 50 the week after I return, which will be like the 14th of July. The Wednesday will be the Wednesday I'm back. And after that, we don't have anything planned. So I've asked for y'all to kind of consider what you'd like to study next, and haven't heard anything back yet, and that's okay. So we still have 2 or 3 weeks at least to think about that. If there's something, we can keep going right into Exodus if you want to go into Exodus. I mean, Genesis is a big, hard book in its own way, but it's also almost all narrative. So stories are easy to study. Stories are relatively easy to teach. But you get into Exodus, you start getting into laws and stuff like that down the road. There's a lot of really fascinating narrative to begin with. But so whatever, y'all talk about it amongst yourselves and think about it. Sherry says hi. She's been working hard and working late. Today was the last day for her school, for the kids. They were online. Their last day at school was yesterday. Today they were all online. And a lot of real good schoolwork got done the last day of the year at home online. They were just really learning. So, okay. That's what we have for tonight. And if you have any other questions or thoughts about these prophecies, they're very important. They're very historic. And they go to not just how the tribes saw themselves, but how they saw each other. It's the politics going on here are not just Israel against the world, but the different tribes of Israel as they deal with each other. They have to dwell together in this land, and they're not all going to have the same result. It's not going to be God making sure everybody gets treated and comes out exactly the same. Some will be preferred and some will be slighted. Some will be wealthy, some will struggle. And yet they're all brothers. So they have to figure out how to live together with this. And one way to do that is to justify the people who are suffering and saying they brought it on themselves. Okay. Mr. Kelso, will you lead us in a closing prayer here?